Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Brewer's Minute. So this week, we're delving into a topic that has been requested a few different times, and that is getting specific with sideboard cards in Modern. So if you go over to MTG Goldfish and you look at the most played cards in the Modern format, you will probably be surprised to find that a lot of those cards are sideboard cards that primarily show up in the 15 sideboard cards rather than the 60 main deck cards. These cards are super important. In fact, in a format as diverse and powerful as Modern, you could even argue that your sideboard slots are just as important or maybe even more important than your main deck slots. And that's why we see so many sideboard only cards populating the list of most played cards in the Modern format. So today what we're going to do is talk about the sideboard only, or sideboard mostly I guess, cards that show up in the top 100 cards in Modern. And we're going to talk about what these cards are. We're going to talk about other options you have for similar effects and what matchups these are for out of the most played matchups in Modern. So a quick reminder before we break down the top sideboard cards of Modern. If you enjoy Brewer's Minute and the other series here on the channel, it would be amazing of you if you could click that subscribe button down in the corner of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So let's start off with the number one most played sideboard card in Modern, and that is Stony Silence. And believe it or not, Stony Silence is the 10th most played card in Modern, number 10 overall, and this is including every single card. This card is super important to the format. So why is Stony Silence number one as far as sideboard cards in the Modern format? And the reason is it hates on a lot of important matchups. Tron and Affinity are two of the top 4 decks in Modern, and Stony Silence is one of the best sideboard cards for those matchups. It locks down Affinity, turns them into a bunch of just underpowered creatures. They can't equip their cranial platings, they can't activate their steel overseers, they can't go all in on Ravager. So good in that matchup. As far as Tron, it shuts down expedition maps, chromatic spheres, chromatic stars, keeps your opponent from wiping your board with Oblivion Stone. So it's a A++ sideboard card in those matchups, while it's also relevant in some other less important matchups. Ad Nauseam's like a top 10, top 12 deck in Modern. Very good there because it shuts down the mana necessary for the opponent to combo off because they're using Lotus Blooms, Pented Prisms, things like that. And it also just hates on random like eggs, KCI combo decks. So there's these weird fringe matchups where it's very good as well. As far as substitutes for Stony Silence, there's really nothing that does what Stony Silence does. You're really looking at Kataki, I guess, but that's not good in every matchup. That's why Stony Silence is so great. Kataki is great against Affinity, making your opponent have a cumulative upkeep essentially for all their artifacts, but doesn't work against Tron because Tron is looking to sacrifice their artifacts right away anyway. And then you have a bunch of targeted artifact or enchantment removal like Ancient Grudge, Wear Tear, Nature's Claim. And while these are good cards to have, and they're better against some artifacts, if your opponent plays an Ensnaring Bridge, Stony Silence isn't going to do anything, or a Worm Coil Engine. So it's good to have those as an option, but nothing locks down artifact-based decks like Stony Silence. So moving down our list of sideboard cards, next we have two graveyard hate cards, and that is Relic of Progenitus and Surgical Extraction. They come in 16 and 17 on our list of most played cards in the Modern format, and this is overall. We're not talking sideboard cards, 16 and 17 overall. And the big matchups for these are decks like Dredge, decks like Storm, graveyard-based decks. But what makes these cards so powerful is, along with locking down tier decks like Dredge and Storm, they have a lot of value in other matchups. So like Surgical Extraction gives you a weird out to Tron, especially if you have Ghost Quarter, because you can Ghost Quarter a Tron land, extract it, keeps your opponent off Tron for the rest of the game. And then it also hates on stuff like Snapcaster Mage, hates on Death Shadow Zoo decks that are looking to get Delirium. So these cards are good in a lot of matchups and great in a couple of really important matchups. And for a card like Relic of Progenitus, the opportunity cost is so low because it essentially cycles for 2 mana, 1 to cast cast it, 1 to sack it to draw a card. So it's a pretty low opportunity cost to play those in your deck, because if you happen to not need the effect, you can always cycle it away. As far as the other options, there's actually a lot of good ones. Some decks go with Scavenging Ooze, gives you a body, lets you pressure while still hating on the graveyard. As far as getting rid of the graveyard, it's kind of expensive. And then we have stuff like Rest in Peace, Leyline of the Void, Nile Spellbomb, and these all see play as well. Just be aware, if you're looking to use your graveyard, you're probably not going to want a Rest in Peace style effect, because that's going to nuke all the graveyards, and you might be better off going with something that only targets your opponent. Moving down our list, our next sideboard card is Dual Purpose, and that's why it shows up in the top 50 most played cards in Modern, and that is Leyline of Sanctity. So Leyline of Sanctity has two main purposes. Number one, it's played in combo decks to protect the combo. So you'll see decks like Storm or Ad Nauseam playing Leyline to keep from getting torn apart by Thoughtseizes and Inquisitions of Kozilek, which are themselves in the top 5 most played cards in Modern. The discard is very high on the list, and it's one of the best ways to beat combo decks that are relying on a specific card or a couple specific cards to win the game. And we've even seen Ad Nauseam moving Leylines to the main deck for that specific reason. So Leyline hoses discard in combo. On the other hand, and what makes Leyline so awesome is it's used in fair decks to hose combo. So if you're playing a white Eldrazi deck, a blue-white control deck, you'll likely have some Leylines in your sideboard to keep from dying to combo cards like Grape Shot, Lightning Storm, Conflagrate. Also good against Burn, where your opponent can't target you with their lightning bolts and lava spikes. So that's what makes Leyline great. It's not really A+ in any popular matchups. It's A+ against some builds of Burn, some other decks, but for the most part, it doesn't just directly hose a tier 1 deck, but it gives a decent amount of value in a whole bunch of different archetypes, which puts it pretty high on our list. So moving down to the more fringe sideboard cards that still come into the top 100 most played cards in Modern, we have Dispel, which is kind of like Leyline. It's used in a couple of different ways. For one thing, it's used by control decks to win counter battles, so if your opponent's also trying to counter your stuff, Dispel gives you the cheapest counter to a counter. Also used in decks like Storm to protect your combo. So if your plan is to resolve one big spell like Past in Flames or Gifts Ungiven to win the game, this is the cheapest way to make sure you can force that spell through, because your opponent is probably bringing in negates, dispels, stuff like that as well if they have blue mana. Then we have a bunch of creature sweepers like Engineered Explosives and Anger of the Gods, both in the 100 most played cards in Modern. And these ones typically come in from mid-range or control decks, and they are specifically to fight against aggro decks. So Affinity, Zoo, Engineered Explosives gives you some additional upside because it hits non-creatures, so it's good against Lantern Control, for example, that wants to have a bunch of cheap artifacts on the battlefield. So these are cards that mostly come in from control and mid-range to hose aggro in some weird combo decks like Engineered Explosives. As far as creatures that are primarily in the sideboard, there's really not a whole lot. We're kind of getting to the bottom of the barrel. There are a couple though. Kitchen Finks can be a main deck card, but you'll find it often as a sideboard card to fight against aggro, where it gains you a bit of life. It blocks 2 times against an aggressive deck. So if you're playing control, playing mid-range, you can bring in Finks from your sideboard in those specific matchups. A great option there. Vendilion Click is sort of the blue Thoughtseize. It's a way you can disrupt your opponent. If you're playing a blue deck, you don't have access to a literal Thoughtseize or Inquisition of Kozilek. It's a way to take a combo piece out of your opponent's hand to help you stay alive. And then we have Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, which again kind of walks the line. Some builds play it main deck, other builds play it sideboard, but it just hates on spells in general. Probably its best matchups are things like Ad Nauseam, things like Storm, where just making every single spell cost more is very relevant, but it picks up a lot of value even against like Snapcaster decks, where they want to Bolt, Snap, Bolt, or Serum Vision, Snapcaster, Serum Visions. Adding a mana to every single spell throughout the game really slows down those decks. So these are the sideboard cards that make up the top 100 cards of Modern. And I figured that maybe this would help as far as deck building and deck construction, where you're going to sit down, you're going to build a deck. You want to know not only what sideboard cards you need, and one of the easiest ways to build a sideboard is to look what other people are playing. If you look at a whole bunch of people and everyone's playing some sort of graveyard hate, that's a pretty clear sign that unless you have some weird deck that naturally doesn't care about graveyards, you probably want some graveyard hate yourself to be able to deal with what everyone else is dealing with. Same goes with some of these other effects. If you're controller mid-range, you want a way to deal with go-wide creature decks. If you're a slower deck, you want a way to gain some life and block against aggro with Kitchen Finks. So these are the cards that make up the most played modern sideboard cards. So when you're building your deck, make sure to cover your bases. Even if you don't play this specific card in every scenario, make sure you have something for graveyard, something for spell-based combo, something for artifact-based decks, because that's going to help you have a lot more success in the modern format. And as we talked about a while ago on a Brewer's Minute, typically speaking, go as wide as possible. It's better to have a Stony Silence that hates on Tron and Lantern Control and Affinity than have a Kataki that hates on Lantern Control and Affinity but doesn't really hate on Tron. So pick the widest sideboard options available because they'll be relevant in the most matchups. And Modern is a crazily diverse format, so you never know what you're going to run into. And then the other value of this is kind of refreshing where you bring these cards in. This is the purpose for these sideboard cards. This is where you bring them in, and I think that learning to sideboard, and I'm still not a great sideboarder by any stretch of the imaginations, but learning how to sideboard is one of the most important skills to getting better at the actual gameplay of Magic. So hopefully having this quick rundown of Stony Silence for this and this and this, Graveyard Hate for this and this and this and this, will be beneficial when you're actually playing a game of Magic, knowing when to bring these cards in. So anyway, what other sideboard cards do you like? What else is important to have a plan for in Modern? Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.